It began with the sound of the engine cooling, that soft ticking a person ignores, until it is the only sound left in the world. The highway behind them had narrowed into a dark ribbon, and the forest pressed up against the road, the way sleep presses against tired eyes. Sam killed the headlights to save a battery. He couldn't save, and silence slid into the van, as if it had been waiting outside the entire drive. Kira shifted in the passenger seat and said they couldn't stay there, not with the temperature dropping and the map showing nothing for miles. Ben tried the ignition again, once, twice, and the starter only threw up a dry cough. Anna leaned forward between the seats and said there was a light in the trees. Not a car light, not a campfire, something steadier, as if a room somewhere had decided to be warm despite the night. They took their flashlights, because that is what people do when they are sensible, and they moved off the road and into the smell of wet needles and cold earth. Their boots making a careful rhythm, no animals answered. The forest swallowed their beams so quickly it felt as if the dark were drinking them. Still, the light ahead held like a promise someone had written in ink that never ran. The path they found wasn't a path until they were on it. A soft depression through ferns that led them into a clearing where a cabin sat exactly where a cabin should not be. Square, neat, smoke from a short chimney trailing into a low sky. A single window showing the hum of an orange lamp. You could feel through glass. The door stood slightly open. Not enough to be invitation, just enough to be an argument they could decide to lose. Inside was the warmth they had imagined. The kettle was already making its small hiss on the stovetop. 4 mugs on the counter sat side by side like old friends at a bus stop. The floor, the table, the top of the bookshelves were free of dust in a way that told on the room. Someone had wiped these recently. Someone had put their hand along this wood and thought this is good enough for strangers. The smell was wood smoke and something herbal, and beneath that, the faint clean of rain on wool. Kira said hello to the space because it felt like good manners, and somewhere in the boards a sound answered that could have been heat settling, or could have been a person shifting their weight in another room. They saw the photographs last, because comfort asks to be believed first. The wall opposite the stove carried a grid of Polaroids. Men and women and children looking into a lens as if they had been surprised and wanted badly to pretend otherwise. The dates under each picture were red and neat and wrong. Ben said it out loud, the way people say things they want to undo. That the dates were all in October and November and they were still in September. Anna held one edge of a photo with her fingernail and found it stiff and perfectly developed. Not a prop, not a joke. Sam said the ranger must come and go, and maybe this was a lost and found for local hikers. Kira looked at a family of 4 whose smiles didn't line up and decided they should leave when the rain led them. They stayed because the rain came harder, and because the kettle began to tremble, and because the 4 mugs were exactly 4. The tea tasted like something brewed to keep a person awake enough to notice what they had been trying not to. When Kira stood to put her empty cup in the sink, she saw a new photo in the bottom row that had not been there when they walked in. The 4 of them sat around the table in it, the light from the window making a soft halo of their damp hair, Sam's hand still hovering near the kettle as if the picture had caught him mid-thought. The date written beneath was 3 days ahead. She didn't say anything at first. She pressed a thumb against the paper to feel whether it might smudge, and it did not. When she spoke, the others came and stared, and for a long time none of them offered the comfort of being right. They lay down where they could when night locked itself to the windows. Ben on the couch, Sam on the floor beside the cold stove, Anna in an armchair too small to be kind, Kira on a rug whose fibers held the day's damp. The first sound was small, the step of something testing the porch boards. The second circled, more confident, a measured pace that became a map around them. Anna took a picture because she was the sort of person who believed a captured thing behaves better. The flash blew the clearing open for a blink. When she looked at the screen, two tall shapes stood at the edge of the trees, as if they had been carved there before the forest grew back around them. She looked out through the glass and saw nothing. And then she looked again and found the dark had decided to hold that place, the way a clasp holds a locket closed. Morning arrived without the sound of birds. The van outside would not start, and the battery that should have carried a little charge was as quiet as a stone. The charger cable lay coiled as if someone had tidied a small mess none of them remembered making. They took the trail out of the clearing with the kind of hopeful persistence people reserve for instructions that 𝗏𝗏𝗏 fit the object in their hands. The path split, and then pretended it hadn't. After 30 minutes, they stepped into the clearing again from the opposite side, as if they had been gently turned by a hand they couldn't feel. The cabin waited the way a patient person waits for a friend to finish telling a story they've told wrong. Inside, the wall had more to say. New Polaroids. Ben with his mouth open in the soft unkindness of sleep. Anna with her camera lifted the flash, white in the glass. Sam's back bent over the open hood. Kira standing with her shoulders set and a leather book balanced on her palm. The book itself lay on a lower shelf, as if a previous reader had interrupted themselves. Its binding was scuffed the way a road map is scuffed, handled carefully and used constantly. Names and dates filled the pages in tidy columns, and beside each name a single word, repeated enough times to become a rhythm, framed. The last page left a narrow margin, and the margin had been used. 4 names, theirs, tonight, as date, written the way a person writes when the pen knows the shape before the hand does. Sam said this was a trick and a trap, and they would not feed either. Ben said they should burn the photos and the book and whatever the cabin had decided they were. Anna argued for proof, for evidence, for something they could show a ranger or a friend or themselves. Kira listened to the room the way a person listens to a tide in the dark, counting the seconds between one wave and the next to measure whether it is rising. The seconds grew shorter between quiet and knock. They found the trapdoor under a rug, not because they were looking, but because Sam fell across it when a board shifted under his foot. The rug skidded, the brass ring winked like an eye. The cellar smelled like stone and wet paper. Their lights caught on frames lining the narrow walls, portraits larger than the Polaroids. The smiles arranged the way a person arranges their face for a stranger with a camera. The eyes in the portraits were glossy in a way that wasn't to quite the way eyes should be. At the far end of the wall, an empty frame hung, ready with a brass plate already engraved. And though the lamp shook in Kira's hand, she read Sammy's name and the date aloud, because saying a thing makes it real, and sometimes real things behave when they are named. The knocking above them grew into a metronome for a ceremony none of them remembered agreeing to attend. Dust leapt in the light with each blow, the cellar air convincing itself it was a liquid, trying to find a level. They went back up because fear makes stairs shorter. The window showed the clearing filled with figures placed the way stones are placed around a fire pit, deliberately, with space enough between to walk if one were invited. The shapes did not move. The shapes did not breathe. The shapes waited with a patience that was human, because the human part of patience always breaks a little and looks away. The kettle sang a meager song on a stove no one had lit. The tea in the 4 cups they had abandoned carried steam in slow blue threads that made faces when the room, as air, shifted and then forgot to be faces when someone looked too closely. The forest became a loop that day. They tried to leave in different directions, counted steps under their breath, the way children count, while running past graveyards, turned their heads to make sure the sun remained where they thought it should be, marked trees with broken twigs that were mended when they came around again. The trees began to show carvings low on their trunks, initials and dates tucked among old scars. Some had the rounded softness of age. Some showed fibers still pale where bark had been cut back. Many made a chorus with the ledger. When Anna pressed a fingertip to the newest cuts, the wood wept a sap that smelled like medicine. Dusk doesn't fall in a forest so much as it is agreed upon. The cabin's lamp made a circle of color, and the fog lifted its skirts to join. Polaroids appeared at a pace that made time feel fidgety, the way a waiting room feels when a door never opens. In one, Anna stood in the doorway, with her face askew as if her body had taken a step. Her mind had not finished choosing. In another, Ben stood outside with his arm upraised, the polite way a person raises a hand to ask a question. In a third, Kira held the ledger close enough to smudge the edge of a page, though the ink refused to give. In a fourth, they could see the cellar stairs, and Sam lying on his side, with one hand reaching back toward an empty frame. The night pressed its thumbs into the house until the boards gave a little, familiar surrendering sounds that in other rooms on other nights mean settling, and here meant attendance. The knocking changed key, became a deep, slow drum corrupting the space between heartbeats. The windows showed reflections that were not in the room, and the room showed silhouettes that were not in the windows. When someone spoke, the words seemed to travel too far before arriving in ears that had not moved. The corners of the cabin grew a shade darker than darkness manages, and from that added night came an impression like a smile. Not warmth exactly, more the recognition a shopkeeper reserves for a regular customer. They tried refusing the room. They tried refusing one another. They sat together in a line on the floor, shoulder to shoulder, and counted, and sang a nonsense song from a summer long ago, each voice braiding around the others until the fear had to work to find a clean edge to cut. For a few minutes the photographs blurred, as if the room had forgotten what it was doing. Then the kettle gave a short whistle like an answer, and the Polaroids trembled and sharpened again. Ben stood suddenly for a reason he couldn't articulate, and the door gave before his hand touched it, and the clearing took him the way low water takes a skipped stone. Reluctant, then suddenly easy. He wasn't gone. He was simply farther away than distance could measure, standing in a place where sound couldn't catch him. Kira said his name, and the name worked the way a key works until the lock has been changed. Sam put a hand on 𝗂𝗍𝗄𝗄's shoulder, and it felt like a promise to both of them, until the board beneath him flexed and told another story. Anna moved the wall and lifted the corner of one Polaroid with a fingernail, and the paper didn't tear. It only curled up like a 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏 at a familiar voice, and then fell softly back to lie harder than before. Somewhere under them, a small thing made of glass clicked against wood, and the click ran through the floor joists like a message sent along a fence line. When the hour was so deep it forgot what number it had been, The photographs made their final changes. The 4 new faces were placed in a row where anyone could see them if anyone came. The room relaxed the way a body relaxes after completing a task it dreaded and desired in uneven measure. The knocking ceased. The silhouettes dwindled by a head each breath until only trees stood where anything might have been. The tea cooled into a surface that remembered mouths. The ledger closed itself very gently as a book shuts, and the last reader finds the last line and believes it. Dawn, when it came, was the quiet kind a person mistrusts. Outside, the wet ground held prints that led to the door, and prints that led away, and prints that crossed themselves into a shape. Human feet. Dawn usually choose. The van on the road looked obedient, almost eager. The engine turned as if it had never learned disobedience. The clearing behind them, if there was a behind them, if there was a clearing, did not exist when they checked the map later, and later after that, and a year later when a conversation at a party bent in that direction. They told themselves what happened was a trick the forest plays on tired minds and long days. The wall they didn't see again. The photographs they didn't pull down. The brass plate they didn't detouch. These were details the mind puts into a drawer and closes firmly. From time to time, though, the drawer opens by itself. A smell of damp cedar will thread through a city room with no wood in it. A kettle will sing a soft note when no one is in the kitchen. A person will look at a snapshot a friend took at a picnic and notice a tiny curl at the edge of the paper and a date in red that doesn't make sense. Then decide they read it wrong and set the photo gently face down. On certain nights when rain moves in from the coast and the sky lowers itself to the tops of all the firs, between one town and the next, a driver on a thin road may see a steady orange light. In trees, the highway department swears were cleared 50 years ago. If they turn off and follow the knot path to the knot clearing, they might find for a while a door politely ajar, a mat that refuses to be muddy a kettle with a polite hiss, 4 cups waiting like a joke nobody wants to explain. If they are very lucky and very careful and very quick, they will leave before the wall notices them. Most people are exactly as lucky as the place requires.